What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going to be going through and updating my top 30 quarterback rankings for our Dynasty Fantasy Football Leagues. As you guys know, earlier this week, we did the wide receiver update. Like I said, we got to go through and update these after the NFL draft, now with the 2025 rookie class included in these rankings. So without wasting any more time, let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these quarterbacks. All right, so I got 7 tiers pulled up on our tier maker here today to get through all 30 of these guys. We're going to be working our way from tier 1 all the way down to tier 7, starting at the number 1 quarterback. And in this top tier, this is like the elite fantasy football quarterbacks. I only got 2 guys. It's Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Right now, it feels like these are the only 2 players that have the ability to go out there and score you 25 plus fantasy points per game almost every single week. Last year, Lamar, he averaged 25.6. Josh Allen, he averaged 22.7, but we know that Josh Allen has the ability to go out there and win you any given week. At the end of the day, these 2 players are 28, 29 years old. They got some juice left in the tank. Obviously, they're going to start losing value as they get to 30, 31, 32, 33. At the end of the day, these are some of the best fantasy football quarterbacks that we can be relying on in our Dynasty Fantasy Football Leagues, and I don't really need to talk too much more about these guys. You know that these 2 players are the elite of the elite. Let's go to tier 2. These are going to be very high-end upside quarterback ones. For me, that's going to be Jayden Daniels now at number 3. Jalen Hurts at 4, Joe Burrow at 5, and yes, Patrick Mahomes at 6. At the end of the day, I think Jayden Daniels has earned the right now based off of that rookie season where he averaged 21.5 fantasy points per game to be the number 3 overall quarterback in our ranks. Jalen Hurts is right there with him, 21.3 fantasy points per game. Obviously still young as well. He's 2 years older than Jayden Daniels, so the 2-year edge does give you a Jayden Daniels upside there. And Jalen Hurts, he did have that kind of scare in this offseason so far where maybe they were going to ban the tush push. They didn't. Doesn't matter. Jalen Hurts is still going to be good. And I think even if they ban the tush push, he should still be a good quarterback, but obviously that's still going to be sitting in the back of minds. Joe Burrow, to me, he's going to be there at number 5. I'm not knocking Joe Burrow by putting him at 5, but he does lack the rushing upside that those 4 quarterbacks in front of him have, even though he has the ability to go score 20 plus fantasy points per game just through the air with his arm. And lastly, Patrick Mahomes is going to sit here. He is the lowest scoring quarterback in this tier at 18.4 fantasy points per game, but Patrick Mahomes in Dynasty is a safe asset, a quarterback one pretty much every single week. I think the Patrick Mahomes hate has been a little bit overblown. Even when you look at the guys that are going to be in this next tier below, Patrick Mahomes averaged more fantasy points per game than pretty much every single one of them, except for maybe one guy in that tier. So yes, Patrick Mahomes may not be the number 1 Dynasty quarterback. He may not be the number 2 Dynasty quarterback anymore these days, but he's still a guy that I have in that tier 2 with Joe Burrow, with guys like Jalen Hurts and Jayden Daniels, even if he is in a little bit of a slump right now off of last season, and they're going through a transitional period there in Kansas City in the receiving rooms. Let's go into my tier 3. My tier 3 is going to be those young upside QB1s. I think a lot of these guys are low-end QB1s right now, but I do have Caleb Williams at 7, Justin Herbert at 8, Drake Maye at 9, CJ Stroud at 10, Bo Nix at 11. You should be more than comfortable building around any of these guys in your Dynasty Fantasy Football Leagues. I think Caleb Williams coming in at my number 7 guy. I had him as the number 1 quarterback in the class last year. I obviously have Jayden Daniels as the number 1 quarterback now, but at the end of the day, Caleb Williams does get the Ben Johnson upgrade. People are going to say they don't, really want to believe it until they see it. I still believe it. At the end of the day, Caleb Williams is still a player that I'm very in on, and I definitely think he's a player that we can rely on in fantasy football with this year's additions of those wide receiver and tight end weapons and the offensive coaching switch that is going to go to Ben Johnson. I'm just a believer. I know some people aren't. I think he's a top 7 guy right now in my rankings. Drake Maye, CJ Stroud, Bo Nix, all of these guys still very young as well. 22 for Maye, 23 for Stroud, 25 for Bo Nix, a little bit older, but it still doesn't matter because he averaged 19.4 fantasy points per game last year. These are the young cornerstone type of quarterbacks that we're building around. I think all of these guys are very good quarterbacks, and all of these guys should have the ability to take a step forward this year based off of the production that they had last year. I'm not too worried about guys like Maye who still kind of need to get some wide receiver help. Obviously, they added Kyle Williams and Stephon Diggs. That's good. That's a start. I still think they need a little bit more help. CJ Stroud, they lose Tank Dell and Stephon Diggs for the upcoming season. He ends up getting Jaden Higgins, Jalen Knoll, and Christian Kirk. I like that for him. Offensive line is going to be a little bit of a question, and Bo Nix got a little bit of help as well in Pat Bryant, but that's not a massive, addition to that wide receiver room. Evan Engram's the biggest addition there. Justin Herbert is the guy that kind of is the outlier here. Not an outlier. I guess that's just a lack of better term there, but he is the oldest, 27 years old. He's not one of that young grouping cornerstone type of quarterbacks, I do think he can still be a cornerstone. You can still build around him, but he's a player that is definitely not as young as the others, but he is so damn good. 17 fantasy points per game last year. Ladd McConkey going into year 2. Trey Harris now. You add some additional weapons in Amarion Hampton into this offense. There's going to be some scary days where he's going to run the football a lot, or that offense is going to run the football a lot, and maybe Justin Herbert isn't throwing the football a ton. There's going to be some inconsistencies. He still has the ability to go out and win you a week as well, especially if they're playing from behind, and now with the added weapons in Trey Harris there. So I do think all of these players are cornerstone players we can build around, and all of these players kind of round out the QB1 tier for me here in tier 3. Let's go to tier 4. I think these are fringe QB1s depending on the week, more high upside QB2s. A couple guys in here in Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy at 13, Jordan Love at 14, and Baker Mayfield at 15. Baker Mayfield's the highest scorer in this tier, but the age being 30 years old does bump him down the Dynasty rankings. If you're a contending roster and you don't care about the age, you're going to definitely have an argument that he is more valuable than most of the players in this tier, maybe some of the players in the tier above him. But at the end of the day, these are Dynasty rankings. We do have to account for age. I'm not discounting him heavily, but he does come in at 15. Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, and Kyler Murray. This feels like a group of players that can be ordered in whichever way you want. I have it ordered Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy, and Jordan Love because Kyler Murray, 18.1 fantasy points per game, Brock Purdy, 18.6 fantasy points per game, and Jordan Love, 16.3 fantasy points per game. The Kyler Murray up there for the rushing upside. Brock Purdy obviously scored more fantasy points per game than Jordan Love last year. Plus, I do think he has the better offensive play caller, and I think he has the better offense. Despite the excitement that some people have about Matthew Golden, I still think it's a little bit of a cluster, you know what, there in Green Bay. But I do think that this group here is high-end QB2 production, low-end quarterback 1 production, depending on how you cut it each and every week. And I still think these are the tiers of quarterbacks that we still want to be building these Dynasty fantasy football teams around. But I will say, after this tier, I think it gets very messy for the next couple of tiers, tier 5 and tier 6. I think you could order these guys any which way. And so we'll just hop right into tier 5. Tier 5 for me, going to be Trevor Lawrence, JJ McCarthy, Michael Penix, and Cam Ward. And I would say this is kind of your lottery ticket tier type of group. All of these players I think can improve in the upcoming season. Lawrence obviously had the addition of Travis Hunter, the offensive play caller, in Liam Cohen. JJ McCarthy getting the keys to the castle there in Minnesota. We saw what Kevin O'Connell did with Sam Darnold. Obviously has the weapons at his disposal there of Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, and a bunch of other guys. You also have Michael Penix, who gets Drake London, Kyle Pitts, Darnell Mooney going into year 2, now going to have the starting job fully going into week 1, and Cam Ward with some rushing upside, obviously the number 1 pick in this year's draft. I think he has the ability to go out this year and improve his ranking as well, especially if he uses his legs a little bit more than he did in college, because on tape, I think he showed that he has the ability to do it. Sometimes he needs to just trust the instincts and go, rather than trying to extend that play and make the big play downfield, because of the NFL, it's going to be harder to do that than it is in college. But if he uses those legs like he has the ability to do so, I think he could also see his ranking improve. But all of these guys, I don't care which way you order it. You could order it in any way that you want, and I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. This is the way that I order it right now. I'm pumping the brakes for myself on JJ McCarthy, because I do think that JJ McCarthy is probably the most likely in this tier to see his ranking go up very rapidly over the next 12 months. Just that Kevin O'Connell effect. We saw it happen with multiple guys in this system before, but this group of players right here just leaves me very excited, and I think any of these guys as your QB2 in a superflex league should give you a lot to be excited about. Now let's go on to tier 6. Like I said, I don't think there's a big gap between tier 5 and tier 6. I think tier 5 has the upside, but there's some safety in some of these veterans here that are going to probably outscore some of the guys that I have ranked above them, but they are down here because of age. It's going to be Jared Goff. It's going to be Dak Prescott. Tua Tagovailoa, obviously a little bit of risk there, and Bryce Young, I still think a little bit of risk there as much as I like him. But that's kind of what this tier is. It's going to be that older value type of quarterback with some risk as well. Goff averaged 19 fantasy points per game last year. Dak averaged 15.6. Obviously, he got injured last year as well, but I do think that Dak is closer to Jared Goff than the points per game shows from last season. Tua Tagovailoa, 17 fantasy points per game. Obviously, the concussions, and then Bryce Young, very bad start to the season. Second half of the season started to wake up, and now you add Ted McMillan into this offense. It should mean better things for him, but I do think we have more data right now showing us that it's a little bit riskier than it is the back half of last year. So I am pumping the brakes on Bryce Young, because I was very high on Bryce Young, a year ago, and I've kind of cooled off on that. But at the end of the day, I think any of these players, if you are a contending team, just like I said with Baker Mayfield, Goff and Prescott, maybe even Tua as well, are probably worth the risk for the fantasy points per game that they're going to provide your lineup. They're a little bit older, so you can probably get them cheaper. That age is bumping them down the ranks ranks, and the risk is bumping him down the ranks with Tua. But at the end of the day, this is also a tier of very, very safe quarterback to play that you can probably still get 2-3 more years out of those top guys that are still 30 years old. So let's move on to the last tier, and this last tier is the largest tier. I don't really know what to call this tier when it comes down to it. I think this is more so just a lot of risk. We'll wait and see. Maybe just the wait and see tier is what it is. And then the older guys that are probably going to be replaced here in the next year or two. At the end of the day, I got Jaxson Dart here. I like Jaxson Dart a lot. I think he's eventually going to be the quarterback one here for the New York Giants, probably sooner rather than later. I would not be shocked to see him get starts here in 2025. And if he has Malik Neighbors on his team, which he does, it's going to be very good for him. So I do like that as the top player in this tier. I debated maybe throwing him at the back end of tier 6, but because he's a late first round pick and wasn't a guy that was drafted in the top 15, I am going to pump those brakes just a tiny bit. Justin Fields here, I think you're going to get a good window here, maybe a year or two where he's the starting quarterback. And obviously when he's on the football field, he scores fantasy football points, but the problem is he doesn't perform as a quarterback on the football field in real life, so he's often replaced. I do think that this regime, as much as they say they like Justin Fields right now, there's going to be a guy in the next class or two that they like better, and I do think Fields will eventually be replaced. So he is risky to me. I think he's better as a QB3 on your roster where you can plug him in those matchups and get the rushing upside. Anthony Richardson, I think, is likely to be replaced as well unless he takes a massive step this year, which I don't necessarily see happen. Would not be surprised to see them end up going with Daniel Jones for some games this season. Sam Darnold, obviously I got a lot of love for Sam Darnold as a Vikings fan. He came in, performed well above expectations last year. I think a lot of that was the Kevin O'Connell effect. I don't like that Sam Darnold leaves Kevin O'Connell for his NFL production moving forward. I don't think this is a coaching staff that's going to get the best out of him. They're not very offensive focused the way that Kevin O'Connell and his staff is. The weapons are downgraded. The offensive line is downgraded. I don't like it for Darnold, and they draft Jalen Milroe. I think he's going to be looking over his shoulder while he's here in Seattle, and this is a contract too where it kind of is a one-year prove-it deal still for Darnold, despite some of the funny money on the back end of the contract. Doesn't give me a lot of confidence in him. These are the older vets that I think we can rely on in this tier, but because of the age, you can't really, have them on your roster long term. That's Matt Stafford at 28, 29 Geno Smith, and 30s Russell Wilson. I do think obviously Stafford being 37, pondering retirement a couple of times over the last couple of seasons, probably going to run it back for a year or two. You can get him, some production on your roster, but last year 13.9 fantasy points per game. It is one of the lower fantasy points per game of guys in this grouping, so it's not the greatest. Obviously they had Devontae Adams, so I expect that to bounce up and go up a little bit this year. Last year he didn't have Puka and Cooper Kupp in the lineup for some time, so I do think that will improve. At the end of the day though, 37 years old, you're only going to get a couple years left out of him, maybe one or two, and then you're done with Matthew Stafford, and his value doesn't have the chance to increase because of his age. Geno Smith going to the Raiders, 35 years old, reunites with Pete Carroll. I like him for a contender, but other than that, you're not banking on Geno Smith. I think this is a team that could be looking for another quarterback in the next 2 seasons, but in the short window, if you're a contending roster, like I said, Geno Smith is going to give you some production. And then Russell Wilson, he's going to be looking over his shoulder all year because Jaxson Dart is sitting there. I think if he's on the football field for you, he's going to give you some fantasy points. Other than that, you're not really too excited about Russell Wilson. And over the last couple of years, going from the Denver Broncos to the Pittsburgh Steelers to the New York Giants, writing's on the wall. Russell Wilson's career is quickly coming to an end, unfortunately, because Russell Wilson was very fun to watch for a long time there. But I don't think any of these players give you a ton of confidence. I do like Jaxson Dart. I will not include him in the group of that. But long term, I don't think, a lot of these guys give you a ton of confidence. You can get some years out of Matthew Stafford. He feels criminally underrated, but the age, it just feels like he's a year away from retiring. So that's kind of where I'm at with this group of guys. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Last time you guys told me I was way high on Jordan Addison. I don't think wide receiver 20 was that high, but hey, I'll hear the argument. Who am I high? Who am I low on here in these rankings for our quarterbacks? But look, that's all I have for you guys today. So if you did enjoy the video, make sure you hit the subscribe button. You don't want to miss the running back and the tight end ranking updates that we do later next week. You also don't want to miss the upcoming Dynasty Trade Review show. Speaking of Dynasty Trade Reviews, if you're in our Discord, you can submit those in the Trade Review channel. That Discord is free to join, so there is no risk in doing that. So if you're not a member of the Discord, go join that Discord. And if you found something in today's video actionable, entertaining, you just like the content and you want more of it, hit that like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support, and it does help us get our content out there to more people so we can keep growing this community here at the League FFB. So if you haven't pressed that like button for me yet and you want to do me a favor, please go down there and hit that like button. I'd greatly appreciate it. But with all of that out of the way, I have nothing else for you guys today, so I will see you on our next episode. But until then, peace out.